and welcome to the channel and our new video, 20 classic rock albums from the 1970s. Now to kick off, I'm going to start with Court and Spark from 1974 by Joni Mitchell. Now for me, from 1970 until she went really jazzy with Mingus in 79, she was one of the artists you just had to listen to. You just had to buy Joni's albums. The wonderful songs, the depth and perception of the lyrics, the melodies to die for, and the music played by some of the greatest players on the planet. And to top it all, that wonderful voice. And here on Court and Spark, we find Joni at the top of her game. The list of credits for this album is huge. We have Tom Scott, John Guerin from the Jazz Fusion LA Express, Joe Sample and Larry Carlton from the Crusaders, David Crosby, Graham Nash and many, many more. Even Jose Feliciano of Light My Fire fame turns up and has Theory lead guitar for Free Man in Paris. Even Cheech and Chong, the stoner comedians, guest on one track. Now Scott, Guerin, Sample and Carlton add a jazz-tinged flavour to most of the tracks. Now highlights for me on this album include the stately ethereal title track, the jazz swing of Car on a Hill, People's Parties where Joni accompanies herself with those gorgeous multi-track vocals, the best choir you'll ever hear, the zany raucous rock and roll of Raised on Robbery with Joni doing her best Andrew Sisters impersonation. It's just a wonderful record, beautifully crafted, beautifully played and beautifully recorded. A true classic of the 70s. Now for pick number 2, again I visit 1974 and Steely Dan's Pretzel Logic. Now the Dan started out as a band of great musicians, but as time went on, the band's two leaders, Donald Fagen and Walter Becker, slowly boiled down the band to just the two of them. And then they would employ the greatest session musicians around for endless takes of their songs. They spend hours and hours in the studio with some of the greatest session musicians around, just trying to get the perfect take. I guess just looking for perfection. But on this album they still had the basic nucleus of the band, which was Donald Fagen keyboards, Walter Becker on bass, Jeff Baxter on lead guitar and Denny Diaz on guitar. But even on this album they are accompanied by a whole host of session musicians. Now to describe Steely Dan's music is it's really tough, but the best way I can describe it is they mixed a whole host of musical styles, but mainly pop, rock and jazz, cramming it all in to a 3 to 4 minute pop song. They somehow worked in all the complexities, intricacies, techniques of jazz into a 3 to 4 minute pop song. Now add to that great melodies, great hooks, great harmonies, and topped off by Becker and Fagen's sardonic, world-weary lyrics, you had a formula that came up trumps time and time and time again. The record moves seamlessly from the bossa nova swing of Ricky Don't Lose That Number, the rock funk of Night by Night, the moving Any Major Dude'll Tell You. They even cover a Duke Ellington number, East St. Louis Toodaloo, complete with a ragtime pedal steel guitar solo, and the majestic blues to jazz of the title track, Pretzel Logic. So with Pretzel Logic, did Steely Dan achieve their quest for perfection? Pretty much. It's a great album from top to bottom, and for me it's a must-have purchase. Now for my third pick, let's go back to 1970, Paul Kantner and Grace Slick's album Blows Against the Empire. This is a concept album, and the story is basically about a couple who were fed up with late 60s America and all its restrictions, especially on the growing counterculture. Vietnam, sending young men off to fight in a meaningless war. The couple then find that they are expecting a child and decide with others to hijack a starship. Now once they have control of that starship, various tensions and conflicts come to the surface, but our hero sees control and the starship sets off for new galaxies. Now this could have all come over as really pretentious and over the top, but here it works. It works because of Kantner and Slick's great songwriting. It's just one great song after another. Great lyrics, great construction, great melodies, and of course the great musicians employed here. Jerry Garcia, Graham Nash, David Crosby, Jack Cassidy, the usual suspects, and Kantner and Slick's voices have never sounded better. Now for me the highlights on this album are the first track, the prototype grunge rock of America, the beautiful folk ballad, The Baby Tree with Jerry Garcia guesting on banjo, and Hijack. Now Hijack is just Paul Kantner on 12 string and vocals, Grace Slick on piano and vocals, and for 8 minutes they take you through a kaleidoscope of ever-changing beautiful melodies. It's just a classic track. But the standout track for me is A Child Is Coming, and I'll listen to this till the day I die. I just love this track. And basically you have Kantner, Slick and David Crosby weaving their vocals in and out of each other, just accompanied by Kantner's 12 string and Jack Cassidy's sonic bass lines. It's just amazing. If you get the chance, go onto YouTube and listen to A Child Is Coming off this album. It's just a beautiful, beautiful piece of music. So on to pick number 4, from 1978, Green by Steve Hillage. Now Steve Hillage is for me one of the great unknown, forgotten guitarists of the 1970s. Before embarking on a solo career, he'd been part of the band Gong. Gong were a lovely bunch of slightly bonkers hippies who on their albums and sometimes chaotic live concerts portrayed the hippie life and ideals in all its glory. But make no mistake, Gong were a bunch of very, very good musicians. When Hillage went solo in 1975, he still portrayed many of those ideals and philosophies. Peace and love, belief in UFOs, positive vibes. He even talked to trees, all of which made him an object of ridicule in the music press. But turn up at Hillage concerts and you would be surrounded by people sporting Sabbath, Motorhead, Thin Lizzy, Led Zeppelin t-shirts. These people had come to watch a master of the guitar. Now, from a solo career that spawned 9 albums, Green is Hillage's masterpiece. Green somehow manages to combine rock, funk, Tangerine Dream, prog rock, trance, and with Nick Mason producing and guesting on drums for one track, even a little Floyd. But it's all topped off by some unbelievable guitar playing from Steve Hillage. Now, as a rhythm section for this album, Hillage employed jazz funk legends Joe Blocker on drums and Curtis Robertson Jr. on bass guitar. But you can't have a jazz funk rhythm section on a progressive rock record? Yes you can, and it works. The sound here is thick and multi-layered, and Mason's production captures it all. From the funk rock of Unidentified to the majestic sweeping guitar soloing of Palm Trees Love Guitar. And again, if you've got the time, go to YouTube and type in Palm Trees Love Guitar by Steve Hillage and you will hear some of the most beautiful guitar soloing that's ever been put onto record. And the prog rock epic of the glorious Om riff. So like I said at the beginning, Hillage today is largely forgotten and not remembered as one of the best guitarists of the 70s. The man was an incredible guitarist and an incredible musician. And if you want to go back and have a listen to Green, you know, it's a masterful album. One of the best prog rock albums I've ever heard. Now today, Steve Hillage still plays, but he plays with his dance trance band, System 7. But every now and again, he'll strap on that guitar and you can see and hear a master of his craft. Next up, from 1975, Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen. Now back in the 70s, I used to visit this little record shop just outside London's Leicester Square tube station called Revolver Records. To get to it, you had to walk through this clothes boutique and then down these little winding steps to a basement to this tiny record shop. If it had more than 6 people in it, it was overcrowded. Now the bloke who ran it would have a little shelf just behind the counter, and on it he'd display his album of the week. Now this particular Saturday, I'd come in, and what caught my eye as I come down the stairs was that iconic cover of Born to Run, with Bruce leaning against Clarence Clemens. Now, I got into a serious dilemma. I come specifically for another album, which the title of which escapes me now. I'd not really heard Springsteen up to that point. I'd seen all the stuff in the music press, the future of rock and roll, and I'd read some reports on some great concerts he'd done. But this album called to me. It called to me across the shop. I'm a great record. I'm one of the best records of all time. Buy me. But do I take a chance? Kept looking at the album, going around, looking at other records, kept looking back at that sleeve, and I thought, I just got to take a punt on this. I have got to take a punt. So I bought the album. It just screamed at me, I'm a great record, buy me. So what did I find when I finally got that record home? Well, I think by halfway through track 1, Thunder Road, I thought I'd made a good investment. By the end of track 2, 10th Avenue Freeze Out, I knew it. Those wonderful songs that I always think of mini movies, of hope, loss, dreams and survival, played by a band that had honed their skills over hundreds of gigs, playing in bars, clubs, playing anything and everything. Clarence Clemons on sax, blasting out those fantastic solos, putting his heart and soul into every note. Springsteen himself, when words and emotion fail him, like on the heartbreaking Backstreets, pushing out those solos on that beautiful Fender Esquire guitar. Born to Run is an album that bursts with soul and emotion, and Springsteen's voice, in my opinion, has never sounded better. Every song is top quality, but the highlights for me are the life-affirming stomp of 10th Avenue Freeze Out. Jungleland with its epic Clarence Clemons sax solo. The beautiful piano riff of Backstreets, and Meeting Across the River. A tale of two deluded hustlers still chasing that big score, set to a lonely single trumpet and piano by the Professor, Roy Bittan. Born to Run is a true gem, and you know what? That intuition didn't let me down. Next up, from 1973, Jethro Tull, A Passion Play. Now, this is another album I took a chance on. Apart from a few singles, hadn't really heard Jethro Tull back in 1973. They weren't a band that I followed that much, but this cover intrigued me, and I just had the feeling this is going to be a great album. It's another concept album which concerns itself with the death and journey through the afterlife of one Ronnie Pilgrim, and it all takes place in the mythical Linwell Theatre somewhere along the Fulham Road. Now, I've never paid that much attention to the concept. For me, it's just a roller coaster ride through 40 odd minutes of great music. Now, Jethro Tull threw everything in here. Blues, rock, folk, flamenco, jazz, classical music, heavy metal, and even some Monty Python. And somehow they blended it all together. One problem I've always had, and still have, with progressive rock, or as it's known now, prog rock, is the aimless noodling a lot of bands who play in that genre do. Here, on this album, A Passion Play, everything makes sense and has its place. Now, on the old vinyl album, as you came to the end of side 1, there was a lovely little piece of Wind in the Willows, Edward Lear, sort of whimsical fantasy called The Hare Who Lost His Spectacles. And this continued at the start of side 2 for a couple of minutes. Now, when Passion Play was released, the whole album was derided in the press. Oh, it got such a critical backlash, you know. And this piece in the middle, The Hare Who Lost His Spectacles, this was singled out for particular criticism. Now, I love it. I love the whole album, and for me, that little piece, The Hare Who Lost His Spectacles, breaks up the album, and I've never had a problem with it. But like I say, when this album came out, it was ridiculed in the press. I mean, you know, it was given some scathing reviews. And what got me was that the album before this, Thick as a Brick, which was along the same lines, got great reviews. So I've never figured that one out. But this is an album I played for 47 years and I still love it to death. It's a great record. The players on this album, the band that comprised Jethro Tull back then, which were Ian Anderson on vocals, flute, acoustic guitar, soprano saxophone, Martin Barr electric guitar, John Evan backing vocals, piano, organ, synthesizer, Jeffrey Hammond bass guitar, spoken word, and Barrymore Barlow on drums, percussion, etc. Now, each one of these players on this album, they play out of their skins. It's just a magnificent performance. I mean, how they actually how they actually did this in concert was beyond me. But the one thing I find really sad is that apart from the actual tour of this album back in 73 and little bits in 74 and 75, this album gets ignored when Jethro Tull played live, and it's such a shame because this is a great record. My next pick would have to be from 1972, Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. The rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. Now, my full review of this album is in the description. There's a link in the description. But I'll say here, if you love pop rock, it's a must-have. Next up, Neil Young, On the Beach from 1974. Now, Neil Young throughout the 70s was a very prolific artist and put out many great albums in that decade, most of which are excellent, and there's a good few classics in there. If you ask me my favourite at any one point, it changes all the time. It could be After the Gold Rush, it could be Harvest, it could be Zuma, it could be Rust Never Sleeps. But somehow I always come back to On the Beach. This is the one that resonates with me the most. Now, I've read some reviews over the years and a few mention this album as Young's forgotten depressive masterpiece. Personally, I don't see it like that. Neil Young has always been introspective. That's just part of what makes the man the artist he is. And on this album, he's never sounded better. Now, the highlights for me on this album include the strutting Walk On with its off-the-wall slide guitar, courtesy Ben Keith, the stately mournful See the Sky About to Rain set to a backdrop of Wurlitzer electric piano and pedal steel, and the slow mournful bluesy On the Beach, with Young cranking out some guitar solos that sound like they come from the very depth of his soul. Songs lyric-wise concern themselves with Young's breakup from his wife Carrie Snodgrass, his disillusionment with the trapping of stardom, and the inactivity of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and all that comes with growing older and hopefully wiser. There's even a song about Charles Manson, Revolution Blues, a song which I always think would fit in perfectly with an episode of The Walking Dead. Introspective? Yes. Depressing? No. Great album? Yes. And for our next album, we journey to 1976 for The Pretender by Jackson Browne. This is Browne's fourth album, and for me, it's the best he ever did. When all his talents as a singer-songwriter came together for a near-perfect record as you'll find anywhere. Now, for The Pretender, Browne was aided and abetted by some of LA's finest session musicians, including Jim Gordon on drums, Albert Lee on guitar, Roy Bittan on piano, Leland Sklar on bass, and even Loud George turned up for a couple of sessions. Now, this is a collection of songs pulled from the heart, with deep perception and insight. The Fuse, with its contemplation of life and its purpose, Sleep's dark and silent gate, another masterful piece of writing about how time and life is just so precious. Daddy's Song, probably the best song written by a son to his father. And The Pretender, a sad requiem for the hippie dream. Not a record for all occasions, but a sad, beautiful masterpiece. So to round off part one of this video, Quadrophenia by The Who from 1973. Now, for a long time, when people mention rock operas, Tommy was the album. But I could never get into it. It never rocked my boat. Don't get me wrong, it's a good album, but it just, I don't know, just didn't resonate with me. I always felt that it was Quadrophenia that was the better album. Now, it's only been the last, 25 years that Quadrophenia has been truly recognised for the magnificent piece of work that it is. I was brought up in that time in the 60s where Quadrophenia is set in London, and the album captures the mood of the time perfectly. Now, all the band are on fire on the album. Daltrey on vocals, Townsend on guitar and keyboards, cello and banjo, John Entwistle on bass guitar and French horn, and Keith Moon on drums. Now, like I said, the whole band are on fire on this album, but what adds that extra layer is Townsend's fantastic synthesizer work and Entwistle's layered horn parts. Now the record has 4 reoccurring themes. Is It Me for a Moment, John Entwistle, Bellboy, Keith Moon, Love Reign Over Me, which is Pete Townshend's theme, and Roger Daltrey's The Real Me, all of which weave in and out of the songs. Now the narrative of the album centres on a young working class mod named Jimmy. He likes drugs, beach fights and romance, and becomes a fan of The Who after a concert in Brighton, but is disillusioned by his parents' attitude towards him, the dead-end jobs he ends up with, and an unsuccessful trip to see a psychiatrist. He clashes with his parents over his use of amphetamines, and he has difficulty finding regular work and doubts his own self-worth. Quits his job as a dustman after only 2 days. Although he's happy to be one of the mods, he struggles to keep up with his peers, and his girlfriend leaves him for his best friend. Now after Jimmy destroys his scooter and he contemplates suicide, he decides to take a trip to Brighton, where he had enjoyed earlier experiences with fellow mods. However, he discovers that the ace face who led the gang now has a menial job as a bellboy in a hotel. Jimmy feels that everything in life has rejected him, so he steals a boat and uses it to sail out to a rock overlooking the sea. On the rock and stuck in the rain, he contemplates his life. The ending is left ambiguous as to what happens to Jimmy on that rock. But what makes this album truly great is the songs and the performances. One great song follows another. The Real Me, in which the Review and the Enemy described the opening riff akin to a boot going through a plate glass window at 3 a.m. in the morning. Is It In My Head, a mini opera in itself. The classic single 515, still one of the most powerful rockers The Who have ever done. Bellboy, with Moon the Loon taking lead vocals in his best Cockney accent. Dr. Jimmy and Mr. Jim, Love Reign Over Me. I love every song on this record. This was also the first record that made me realise just what a great bassist John Entwistle was. His spidery bass lines are all over these songs, sometimes using the bass as the lead instrument. What a player. And you know what? There's not a duff song on this great record. So there you have it. The first 10 in my 20 classic rock albums from the 70s. I hope you'll join me again for part 2, and please put your comments and your picks in the comment section. Thanks for watching.